Good morning. We will be starting now. First of all, I would just like to thank you all for joining us and for coming and for discussing CDW recycling in Lebanon. I would like to welcome Ms. Asma Zain. She's the chairwoman for the board of directors of AUB NCC and founder of Crypta. And she's a very, very dear friend to the NCC family to deliver the opening remarks.
Thank you. هون أحسن لأنه أنا وقاعدة ما بعرف. Thank you. صباح الخير جميعا وأهلا وسهلا فيكم. Esteemed partners, distinguished guests, and valued attendees joining us both in person and online. Dear colleagues and team members, on behalf of the AUB Nature Conservation Center, I warmly welcome you to today's event. I also extend the greetings and regrets of our NCC Director, Dr. Yasser Abu Nasser, who due to prior commitments is unfortunately unable to join us. We are truly honored by your presence and active participation. Our sincere thanks go to the speakers, partners, and organizers, with special recognition to key collaborators, including the European Union, Transparency International Lebanon, Vice Provost Ili Ael, the Transparency International Lebanon team, and former Minister of Environment, Dr. Nasser Yassin. This gathering serves as a vital platform for constructive dialogue, knowledge sharing, and collaboration among all stakeholders committed to addressing Lebanon's constructive and demolition waste challenges. It is through these open exchanges and partnerships that innovative solutions emerge and effective strategies are developed. Meaningful progress depends on the leveraging shared expertise, fostering collective action, and building strong cross-sector partnerships. Only by working together can we establish sustainable systems that benefit our environment, economy, and communities. We are confident that this event will mark a pivotal milestone in fostering sustained, meaningful dialogue among diverse stakeholders, thereby catalyzing impactful and measurable progress for our project. Thank you for attending, and I wish you an engaging and insightful event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Asma. I would like to welcome now Mr. Roni Zghaib, Project Lead of Binaa Transparency Project.
صباح الخير. عم نلتقى اليوم جلسة من النقاشات مع عدد من الشركاء وأصحاب الاختصاص بالتعاون مع الAUB NCC اللي عم يشتغلوا وعم يبرهنوا مرة جديدة إنه أهمية المجتمع المدني اليوم بدفش الأولويات والإصلاحات بهذا البلد. من أول ما بلش العدوان الإسرائيلي على هالبلد كان الAUB NCC المركز حماية الطبيعة من أول الجهات يلي عدلوا المشروع تبعهم تحت مشروع بناء يلي عم بتشوفوه هون كرمال تيلبوا حاجة كتير أساسية وأولوية محلية، وركزوا على وحدة من أكتر القضايا المهمة يلي هلأ هي بهيدي البلد وبهيدي المرحلة يلي قبل إعادة الأعمار. حتى يعني هي مرحلة ضمن، إذا نبلش نحكي عن إعادة أعمار ما فينا ما نحكي عن مرحلة التدوير وإزالة الردم. وأهمية هيدا الملف هو ينمشى فيه بطريقة شفافة مسؤولة ومبادئ الحوكمة الرشيدة، وهذا الشيء اللي نحن مع شركائنا بالAUB NCC عم نشتغل على هذا الموضوع. وإذا ما كان في إدارة سليمة وشفافة بتراعي الأثر البيئي ما حنقدر نتقدم بخطوة بمسار الإعمار ونرجع الثقة الأهم شيء اللي هلا نحن عم نشتغل عليه للمانحين بالمستقبل أو السنوات الجاية تنقدر نعمر يلي تهدم، لأنه بعتقد لحالنا صعب كتير نعمل هيدي الخطوة. وهيدي الخطوة اليوم كمان بعتبر كتير مهمة كمان، وخاصة انه بأول هيدا الشهر أعلن رئيس الوزراء السيد نواف سلام انه رح يكون في مبادرة لمؤتمر للمانحين. وبعتقد يعني اليوم الفايندينجز اللي رح يطلعوا وكل الشغل اللي انشغل عليه لازم كمان يصب بجهود الدولة، كمان نحن يكون عندنا رأي كمجتمع مدني ومن أصحاب الاختصاص يلي هو المركز يلي عنده إذا بدكم حلول بتقدر تفيد لهالمرحلة الجاية. ونحن بجمعية الشفافية الدولية لبنان وبالتعاون مع منظمة الشفافية الدولية وضمن مشروع بناء الممول من الاتحاد الأوروبي اللي بنشكر كرمهم وعطول هيك دفشهم للإصلاحات بلبنان مع المجتمع المدني، عم نشتغل مع أكثر من 25 منظمة من كل المناطق على دفع الإصلاحات الوطنية والمحلية يلي هن بلاقوها أكثر إلحاحا، لأنه يعني برهن المجتمع المدني إنه هو اللي بيعرف شو الأولويات وين لازم ندفش، أكيد كمان بالتعاون مع الدولة مش لحاله كرمالتا نقرب خطوة بهذا البلد. تركيزنا الأساسي بهذا المشروع على المناصرة التشاركية ضمن إطار الشفافية أهم شيء والحوكمة الرشيدة لنوصل سوا لإصلاح فعلي ومستدام. وبدي أدعى الجميع بختام كلمتي على الحرص لشفافية هالملف ونشر المعلومات الأساسية المتعلقة بالقرارات، المساعدات والأشخاص والمناطق المستفيدة، وتطبيق معايير آياتي International Standards تنقدر سويا نتقدم وننال الثقة ونساهم ونحاسب عند الحاجة. ونحن بجمعية الشفافية الدولية بندعي كمان كل الحاضرين هون يلي بحاجة أوقات نعرف يعني بيكون في نية للشفافية أو بيكون في نية إنه نشتغل بقصص عالمية بستاندردز عالمية وما بنكون عم نعرف كيف، نحن بندعيكم كمان تتواصلوا معنا في حال في أي مساعدة لهذا الموضوع. بتمنى تكون جلسة غنية بالأفكار وناطرين كل المداخلات والآراء يلي رح تطلع من هالنقاش، وشكراً.
Thank you so much, Mr. Roni. I would like now to start with our first panel. It's about driving systemic reform and advocacy for long-term change. And I'd like to invite Dr. Najat Saliba to the panel, Ms. Nadine Badr, Mr. Rami Nasif, and our moderator would be Ms. Samar Khalil.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us in the first panel for today's event. So our session will focus basically on systemic reform, how policy, institutional mandates, and regulatory tools can be aligned to integrate construction and demolition waste in the recycling into Lebanon's national solid waste management framework. As we know, CDW poses both an environmental burden, but at the same time, it's an economic opportunity. With over 21 million tons projected between 2018 and 2040, Lebanon must move beyond ad hoc responses towards a structured national approach. While Law 80 and the 2024 Integrated Solid Waste Management Strategy provide a starting point, however, there are key gaps that remain. Law 80 promotes waste minimization and recycling, but does not define or regulate CDW as distinct stream. The strategy identifies CDW as a priority, calling for sanitary landfills, extended producer responsibility, and action plans, but lacks mandates, enforcement tools, and funding to ensure implementation. The UN Debris Task Force developed standard operating procedures for rubble management in post-conflict settings, yet these remain confined to emergencies and have not been institutionalized as part of everyday CDW governance. At the same time, unregulated quarrying continues to degrade Lebanon's landscape. We have more than 15 kilometers square exploited, more than 197 million cubic meters extracted, and $2.3 billion of estimated damages. So effective CDW recycling can ease this pressure if backed by strong governance, monitoring, and incentives. Today, we still lack national CDW recycling and disposal infrastructure, material reuse standards and lab testing protocols, systems to track CDW from generation to final use, and clear institutional mandates and effective enforcement. Today's panel brings together key voices from the Parliament, international development community, and the private sector. I'm pleased to introduce MP Dr. Najat Saliba, a Lebanese expert in climate change and pollution control with over 150 publications and more than 20 years as a professor at AUB. She serves on UNESCO's board and chairs as chair of technical advisory group on the global air quality platform. And she has international awards and etc. Ms. Nadine Barakat is a sustainability expert at Dar al-Handasa with over 15 years of experience in waste management and sustainability. She held key roles at Averda across Lebanon, Morocco, Oman, and UAE, specializing in landfills, ESG, and large-scale environmental projects. And Mr. Rami Nassif, a solid waste management expert with extensive experience in dump site rehabilitation, debris management, facility design, policy development, and energy recovery systems across Lebanon and the Middle East. He currently manages the EU-funded Tadweer project at UNDP Lebanon and is a member of the UN Debris Task Force. To start with, Dr. Saliba, I would like to ask you that despite the urgency and scale of the CDW problem in Lebanon, it remains largely unmanaged under the current solid waste framework. What are the key political or governance hurdles delaying reforms in this area? And in your opinion, what legislative actions do you believe are mostly urgently needed to address this gap?
Sorry for the rush, but I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to report that there has been a lot of work done on CDW removal. It started with the report that NCC did in February, I think 2024, right after the hostilities stopped and there was a need to start removing the debris. This was a very good starting point. And the second milestone that happened is that in April 2024, the Commission of Public Works met at the Parliament. Dr. Sroor was there, and I think Dr. Mona Harb was there. They presented the scientific findings and their report. And at the same time, there was a push for the Commission to send recommendations to the government to include the environmental conditions and to include those conditions in the TOR or in the specifications for any bid to come. Luckily, Minister Yassin at the time was ready with all the recommendations. Also, I think that was worked with Dr. Sroor at the time. They were ready to give those to the Commission and to the Prime Minister, and they were included in the specs. يعني هلا المتعهد عنده بقلب الTOR تبعه إنه في شروط بيئية لازم يكون المتعهد عم بيلتزم فيها قبل ما يكون عم بياخد أي كونترا من الجوفرمنت. And that was a major success story, we can say, due to the efforts of Minister Yassin and Isam and the whole team at NCC. This was a major step forward. Now, what did we do after that? We went to Jean Ali, اللي هو the head of the الشراء العام, okay, public procurement. وقلنا له نحن we insist that any contractor who wants to take this further has to comply with the environmental conditions, and that happened. He said, if the recommendation comes from the Prime Minister's office, we have no choice but to comply, and this in fact happened. هلا نحن to push this further, يعني to lobby يعني further for this. On September 9, 2024, I sent as an MP an official letter to the Prime Minister detailing the need to comply with environmental regulations. And we put 4 recommendations to the Prime Minister. First, to take the necessary steps to make sure the debris are properly removed. Second, to put a mechanism in place for reconstruction with recycled materials, and that's important to follow through. And 3, remove customs and high tariffs on cement imports so that the cement factories do not always have the excuse to produce more and to have high prices on the cement. And 4, not allow cement factory to continue working before paying their dues, be it financial dues and environmental dues that I talked about in the last meeting at the parliament. They amount to 3.7 billion US dollars. Okay, so this was the official letter that we sent to the Prime Minister, and it was recorded. On December 17, after that, when they started collecting money to remove the debris, I sent the same letter, and I sent a plea letter to the World Bank, and I said, you know, in your website and in your mandates, you have to respect the environment. And I took like some verses from their website and from their mission and vision, and I asked him, Jean-Christophe Carré, who is the head of the World Bank here in Lebanon, I asked him to really make sure that the environmental conditions are really met in Lebanon before they start taking the debris. And he said, you know, the money that we're going to disperse to the government are conditional, and they have to respect the environmental restrictions and requirements. And this was like a promise from him that the money that is going to be dispersed will be completely linked to the TOR, in which we have the environmental regulations. What I'm trying to say is that if we continue pushing in the right channels, we are able to implement some restrictions and some requirements. Of course, this is not the end of it, because as we speak, I'm preparing a letter to the Minister of Environment asking her what happened after the contractors took the bids. Now I want a report as an MP from the minister to tell me if she followed through and if she monitored the implementation of these contracts to see if the environmental requirements were met. And if they were not met, I'm just gonna also go back to the World Bank and tell them, you know, your money was dispersed without complying, or I would say, okay, this is great, the money was dispersed and the environmental requirements were met. So it's not that we don't have regulations. The 4 requirements or the first recommendations that we put forward to the Prime Minister were based on a complete revision of the laws that we have and the regulations. We have the regulations, we have the laws, but we really have to know what are the channels that we have to follow through in order for us to implement an environmental agenda in everything that is happening. I really wanted to tell you all of these processes because those are successes that have been implemented, and because of this collective effort, I think we succeeded in at least putting this on the agenda of the contractors, of the World Bank, and of the Prime Minister. Thank you.
A final question for you just before you leave. If we just want to move from the emergency case of the CDW after the war and institutionalize the management of CDW generally, what do you think is needed in terms of legislation and in terms of institutional clarification of the roles of the different actors that are responsible for this subject?
Okay, this is a very important question, but this comes as decrees, مراسيم تطبيقية, لأنه this goes under إدارة النفايات. you know, the solid waste management. It doesn't go on its own like this. And what I did is I revised completely the whole law of solid waste management. It took me a year and a half to do that because and this is another subject altogether. The solid waste management law that was approved in 2018 was approved in a rush because they were going to Sadr and they wanted to get money to buy incinerators. All of this stopped, and the problem is that they entangled, يعني they merged السلطة التشريعية مع السلطة التنفيذية, meaning they linked the law to the strategy of the minister, and this cannot be a law. The law has to be an overarching, it has to be broad, and then the السلطة التنفيذية can do its own strategy regardless of the law. So in order for us to see what was working and why it wasn't working, we had to do this whole study to disentangle the role of the minister from the role of the MPs and the role of the parliament. And this took a year. With this now, because we have this broad law that يعني بيقولوا لها المظلة, يعني هي القانون بيكون broad جامع وبعدين المراسيم بتفوت بالتطبيقات. We have a law. I hope it's going to be put forward for discussion. Under this law بيكون عندنا مرسوم لإعادة النظر بكل شيء في دبريز لازم نشيلهم. I think this angle can be taken. Probably another angle ما بشوف غير مطرح فينا ناخدها, بس من هون وطالع فينا ناخدها once this amendment to the law can be is approved.
I will move to Ms. Badr. Thank you so much. Ms. Badr, I would like to ask you, coming from the private sector, from a consultancy engineering firm, what do you think are the main technical, regulatory, or financial obstacles preventing construction companies from reusing CDW materials, especially in large public projects?
Hello, everyone. Thank you. I think it's more putting in place the infrastructure, and the economy probably is one of the main incentives. We need to have in place a system. And I think, as it was mentioned, the bulk has to start with the public and the large projects, and then we can go to the buildings. Putting in place the recycling facilities and the economical and financial incentives is probably what is the most important one, starting with the large scale, and the government will put in place, because today, even if we have enforced the use of aggregates in the projects, if there's no source for these materials, if we don't have recycling facilities in place to feed those projects, we still have a bottleneck there. So once this is in place, we can then duplicate the same for the private sector, for the buildings, etc. And this also needs, and you have mentioned it, control and monitoring and standards in place to give the confidence to use this material. And developing the standards, reference standards for these elements.
Yeah, as you mentioned, one of the major limitations for the reuse and recycling of the CDW is the absence of national standards and quality assurance protocols for the reuse or the recycling. What do you think are the steps needed to start having those standards and to certify such the implementation of these projects, and to build a monitoring system that would include testing labs, traceability systems, and certification bodies?
I think there are two levels. The new law, if it's there and the decrees are implemented, this will provide the infrastructure. In parallel, there are already also a lot of initiatives with Lebanon, who's working on developing standard in coordination with the Order of Engineers and Architects, which need to work in parallel into creating those standards, showing how it's done, integrating them as a voluntary way to implement the projects, targeting bigger projects where client have the means, and we can start implementing those systems in parallel to putting in place the infrastructure.
Another question for you is, you mentioned incentives. Mm-hmm. What kind of incentives do you think we can start implementing to encourage the private sector to start, reusing and recycling those materials. Is there any low-hanging fruits that we can start with and then move to a bigger scale?
Probably if we start from the private itself, it's bringing funding, like the World Bank or other private funds who will put in place the initial projects on a larger scale, who will encourage those and be able to bring in the technology and the building the capacity among the private sector to start this element until the government maybe can himself through other fundings provide tax reductions or facilitations for those projects that are implementing a minimum standard. Advertising also in the marketing, we have green building frameworks like LEED, but we also have EDIS that was developed for Lebanon that is also adapted to the local context, bringing this force through advocacy, through conferences and more stakeholder engagement are also elements that can encourage this.
Thank you so much. Rami, you were a member of the UN Debris Task Force, and you developed those standard operating procedures for post-disaster CDW management. Can you give us a brief overview of these SOPs and how can we institutionalize these SOPs beyond disaster response as a national operational framework for CDW?
Yes, so basically these SOPs were developed as part of the response to the conflict that took place towards the end of 2024. They were divided into 3 volumes. Volume 1 is more about health and safety measures, and it was developed in collaboration with the Lebanese army, specifically the Mine Action Center, as the risk of having unexploded ordnance is high in such circumstances, post-conflict events. It has an overview of most potential safety measures that should be accounted for and issues that should be taken account for having like chemicals in the areas, because we know that not only residential buildings were targeted, but also industrial facilities, and they can have storage of chemical material. Even in residential households, you can have big containers of diesel for heating and whatever, and these all can cause environmental contamination in areas that have been targeted. And we move on to various safety aspects, including to identifying unexploded ordnances within areas and reporting structural stability. It's not the responsibility of the owner to know if this is structurally stable or not, but witnessing certain cracks would require reporting it to authorities and engineers to identify if this is a structurally stable and safe structure or not. So these aspects have to be accounted for as part of raising awareness for the community and various entities. As a second volume of the SOPs, it focused more on the processing of the material and the minimum requirements that are needed to have a process for management, collection, and segregation of the material and the segregation center that should be established. The third volume is more linked to having disposal sites in the form targeting mainly rehabilitation of quarry sites as a final disposal site. As for your second part of the question, I'll start in the reverse aspect. The third volume can be easily incorporated within the day-to-day CDW management, as it governs how we can dispose of the material, especially the non-recyclable and non-recoverable part. The second volume can be partially incorporated with respect to processing the CDW and recovering of material from it. What will remain is the first part, which is more linked towards the collection and of the debris from the damaged site. So part of the second volume and the third volume can be easily incorporated within day-to-day CDW management.
So in your opinion, how can we bridge the gap between policy and implementation, especially in the absence of data on monitoring systems and enforcement mechanisms in Lebanon?
Absence of data and the gap between policy and implementation is not limited to CDW. This has been an issue in Lebanon for various sectors. Usually by practice in Lebanon or by some legislation also they govern it. They follow international legislations and policies whenever there's no local legislation and policies, and they also follow international standards. So that being said, this is a starting point. That does not mean that we should not also customize our own legislations and policy, because sometimes there are specificity in some aspects within the local context that should be also accounted for. But we all know that legislative works and policy making in Lebanon, for having it endorsed, is a long process in many circumstances. Member of Parliament, Dr. Najat Saliba, just mentioned Law 80. Law 80 has been going back and forth between the ministry and the Council of Ministers, and then from the Council of Ministers and to the Parliament for like around 10 years. This just reflects how much time sometimes legislative works takes time before it does a breakthrough. And this is a gap by itself, because sometimes a legislation document, if it is in 10-year delay, there are like newer aspects to the sector and to the circumstances that also should be accounted for. So as a short answer, we have to follow international practices and policies and legislations in the absence of local ones.
Do you have any recommendations or suggestions for regulatory and policy priorities that you can see as critical to start implementing CDW recycling and reuse in Lebanon?
There are several issues that should be accounted for. Primarily, we should set targets. If we look in the neighboring countries and even in international countries such as in Europe, they have all set targets for themselves. In the UAE, for example, they have set a target of 75% recovery of CDW, and they're working towards it. They have developed infrastructure to reach that target with recycling centers, recovery centers, even the approach of dismantling buildings when they want to destroy a building or bring it down to build another one. They have certain measures and procedures. In Europe, they have set target of 70% recovery also, which many of the European countries have already achieved and exceeded, while others are still working to achieve that target. So as a primary objective, we need to have a target set on a national level. Second thing, we need to have standards for recycling and reuse. So what type of material are considered suitable for reuse and recycling? What will be the specifications of the concrete mixes if we're considering aggregates, so that we can reuse it within the construction sector? And what is required as a standard for a mix to have as base course, and or even in mixing it with asphalt as part of some practices? So these standards should be developed by various authorities, from Ministry of Public Works, CDR, نائبة المهندسين Order of Engineers, and also potentially Lebanon standards.
Thank you so much. So basically, to try to summarize what we discussed today, we talked about Law 80 and the need to amend it and integrate more implementation decrees related to specifically CDW in the regulatory framework. The strategy provides a policy basis, but it must be expanded and enforced to include CDW as well. The SOPs that were already developed by the UN Debris Task Force offer a model that could be ready to be scaled and institutionalized. Institutional responsibilities can be clarified. National standards are a must to be developed. Targets should be set nationally on the percentage of recycled materials to be recovered and reused. Starting by following international standards until we develop our own national standards can be a way to proceed. Basically, also incentives, working on incentives, whether financial incentives like tax reductions or even training, building the capacity of contractors and consultants, working in parallel between different initiatives by Lebanon, the OEA, UNDP, and the government working together to develop those standards and mechanisms to monitor the implementation of those standards is a must. Starting with large projects and public projects is a better idea, and then scaling it to smaller projects and the private sector projects can follow later. We can also probably start with voluntary guidelines and with time push it to become mandatory standards as well. So thank you so much for attending this panel, and we hope that a policy brief or anything that comes out of this event will be shared with related stakeholders and pushed forward to be implemented as soon as possible. Thank you so much. Should we take questions later? Okay. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the delay. So I will now be presenting. My name is Antoine Calab. I'm the Associate Director of the Nature Conservation Center and one of the people leading on this project alongside Dr. Aysam Srour and my colleagues Aya Asas and Lynn Farghel. So I will now be presenting effectively how AUB-NCC is mobilizing to push for the establishment of a recycling industry in Lebanon focused on construction and demolition waste management. This is the effort supported by the European Union through a Bina grant, which is managed through Transparency International Lebanon. So this effort primarily has three objectives. First, to study the feasibility and technicalities of establishing a long-term CDW recycling industry in Lebanon. Second, to rally policymakers and all the actors involved, engage them in conversations and seeing how we can enable the establishment of such an industry. And third, raise awareness about the need and the importance of having a recycling industry for construction and demolition waste. A bit of background of how the Nature Conservation Center really got into this. So back early October, when it was clear that the conflict was heading towards escalation, we were called upon by the Ministry of Environment under the previous minister to support the ministry in planning for the management of post-conflict rubble. As we moved forward and started our research around the topic, in parallel with the support that we were giving to the minister, we started expanding the question. And rather than focusing just on immediate post-conflict recovery, we said this could be an opportunity to actually do something on the long run. The reason behind that is that back in 2018, the projections were already stating that Lebanon between 2018 and 2040 will have upwards of 1 million tons of construction and demolition waste on an annual basis, which means that there is a sustainable demand for such a recycling industry. The idea is which policy framework, which financing tools and mechanisms do we need to make this industry not only feasible, but also economically viable and sustainable. So on March 20th, we convened a meeting with around 40 actors from different backgrounds. Some are experts, academics, some are embassies, international agencies, ministry representatives, and all types of organizations. And there was consensus around the need to study the feasibility and push for the recycling of construction and demolition waste, whether it's post-conflict or industrial waste generated on a yearly basis. We started a benchmarking exercise focused on Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, and Japan due to their high recycling rates. And Japan was specifically chosen because of their experience in managing post-disaster rubble. Analysis also includes reforms within the waste management and construction sectors for two reasons. Because the management or the recycling of construction and demolition waste really starts at the design stage of a building. What type of material are we using? The bills of quantities and so on, and then all the way to the lifespan of a building, which eventually ends in demolition. So this is all part of the approach that we are gathering. We also received 2 additional grants and maybe a third on the way to conduct further scientific research and publish research around quantification methods and value chain development and studies. So this is a small summary of the March 20th meeting, which was a closed meeting. The key takeaways were sent to the various agencies, ministries, and stakeholders. We had a diverse participation, both from the solid waste sector and people involved directly or indirectly in construction and demolition waste recycling and management in Lebanon. So what is the process that we are adopting? First, we start with the context analysis when it comes to understanding the context and the landscape of CDW in Lebanon. More than 1 million, as I mentioned, more than 1 million tons a year are expected between 2018 and 2040. 70% of it is concrete. However, there is no current management system. The strategy which was adopted in 2024 does mention construction and demolition waste. However, we feel that this is an opportunity to further develop this component, building on what was done in the strategy. We also then moved to a policy review. So as I mentioned, we looked into the 2024 strategy and are starting the conversation around how the policy environment and the different actors and frameworks can support the establishment of this industry. And also I mentioned that we're conducting an international benchmarking, and for example, Belgium recycles 93% of its construction and demolition waste, and I don't see why we cannot get close to that number. So we are now at a stage of doing the gap analysis and developing the suggested strategy. The model that we are considering in the context of Lebanon is really based around 3 or 4 central recycling sites with transfer stations and GPS-tracked hauling systems with policy enablers. However, this is a very the conversation is just starting, so we're seeing, of course, what is feasible in the context of Lebanon. We will then move on to expert validation. So in the month of August, we have 12 policy dialogues with various groups to validate and give feedback on the strategy, policy recommendation, and SOPs being developed. And finally, end of September, we'll be launching and dissemination the work. There will be a series of engagement with policymakers, a national awareness campaign, and a public dialogue. So this is an example of what we are looking at in our benchmarking, and you'll see that each country has its own model. However, the idea is to look into these subcomponents, also the details of these subcomponents, see how they are applicable in the case of Lebanon, and see what is also achievable in the case of Lebanon. We also are understanding the priorities in this benchmarking exercise. So obviously, pollution prevention and recovery and recycling are priorities. However, there is in some cases less emphasis on market readiness and energy recovery. We're also looking into international agreements, how much they figure in policy, in CDW recycling policies, and so on, as well as different financial tools such as the penalties, the landfill fees, the tipping fees, and so on. As well as one interesting part is integration with public procurement. For example, one way to boost demand for recycled aggregates is to have, for example, a 20% quota on all public infrastructure to use recycled aggregates. So this will also, in a way, sustain demand on the long run. This chart was developed with Dr. Aysam Srour back when we were focusing on the management of immediate post-conflict rubble. So the idea was to really manage the transport from temporary on-site to temporary collection sites and ultimate processing sites, and really understand the labor implications and the environmental implications. From our From our benchmarking exercise, we realized that one possible model is to very much, if we consider that the X's are construction sites or sources of demolition waste, is to find a system where you have transfer stations and central recycling facilities across the country with transport that is managed from the authorities with the help of the Ministry of Environment, with municipal supervision for the individual sites and so on. And you'll see that each stream of waste has already its own stream in Lebanon. However, this is the result of a preliminary brainstorming. This is still an ongoing process, and the research is still ongoing. Some of the financing and governance tools that we are exploring as well. So possible financial models are build, operate, transferred, or PPP, with support from donor agencies, private sector leadership within a governmental regulatory framework. So this is why the third panel will very much be around strategic partnerships. Of course, the Minister of the Environment would have to play a very big role in licensing and environmental monitoring. The government would also have to license and manage hauling and tracking of transportation to prevent illegal dumping. Current practices are, when it comes to managing the waste of a construction site, it's very much the contractor pays a random transport contractor, a pickup truck, and they do not ask questions of where this waste is dumped. And unfortunately, a lot of the waste is dumped in natural sites, in the rivers. So this is a big source of pollution. And it seems that about 20 to 30% of waste in general is construction and demolition waste, which means that there are significant volumes that present a clear environmental threat. Municipalities would have to play a very big role on-site sorting. Financing would come through tipping fees, transport cost coverage, hefty illegal dumping penalties, material sales recovery, and the cost eventually would be transferred from the contractor to the client of a particular project. And policy instrument that also we are considering are subsidies, incentives, as I mentioned, quotas, and the promotion of the secondary or the recovery materials market. Again, these are all initial conversations that are based on the benchmarking, but the idea is to see which measures and if any of these measures are applicable in the context of Lebanon. So in terms of next steps, we are finalizing the strategy, the policy recommendation, the SOPs. We will be conducting the policy dialogues for validation and feedback. We'll be launching a public awareness campaign and engagement process. End of September, there will be the conclusion of the advocacy project and the conclusion, which event also will be the closure of the BINA grant. But we will be continuing our academic research and publications around quantification, value chain assessments, and economic integration. So thank you for being here today. I believe now we have a small coffee break, if I'm not mistaken, before we pick up the two panels. So thank you very much, and I encourage you to engage with the different speakers and the panelists during the coffee breaks and during lunch for your questions and feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. وصحتين. I hope you enjoyed your coffee break. So now we're off to the second panel. It's about the role of the recycling industry on recovery and advancing the circular economy in Lebanon. And we have with us Mr. Dani Aboud, Executive Board Member of the Association of Lebanese Industrialists, ALI, and CEO of TopCat SAL, Dr. Aysam Sroor, Professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, AUB MSFEA, and Ms. Grace Azar, Country Head Health, Safety and Environment, Sustainable Development and Communications at Wholesome. And we have our moderator with us today, Mr. Ralph Speer, Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of Plastic Lab. Thank you.
Good morning. First, I'm happy to be here moderating such a panel. I'm happy as well to moderating with you. I'm really excited for the discussion that we will have. At first, to delve in the CDW world, Dr. Aysam, can you share with us a promising pilot project or research collaboration that demonstrates the technical feasibility of using recycled CDW in Lebanese construction?
Thank you, Ralph. Good to see everybody. A lot of familiar faces in the room, a lot of friends, colleagues, and thank you to NCC for organizing this event. My name is Aysam Sroor. As Ralph said, I'm a faculty member, professor of civil and environmental engineering at AUB. I've been at AUB since 2008. Soon after joining AUB, I started working on the topic of construction demolition waste. And it all started with an interest, a curious question, to be honest. A couple of piles of rubble sitting by the side of the airport or by the side of the Mediterranean, depending on your perspective. And those were rubble from the war we had in 2006, July 2006. Asked a lot of questions. What is this material? What is the plan? What can be done, and so on. 16 years later, I think I have more questions than answers. And speaking of questions, I'll come back to yours. The question from Ralph is on the technical feasibility of recycling CDW. Whether CDW is coming from emergency events like war or non-emergency events, like regular demolition. You tear down a building in Hamra that's 3-story and you want to build a tower. Now you have different perspective on it, whether this is good or not, but that's not the topic. What it means for me is CDW, construction demolition waste. So we've been working a lot on the technical feasibility over the years with teams of engineers and scientists looking into feasibility of applications, working a lot with people in the private sector as well. Holcim is no stranger to us. We've been working with Holcim for years now. There's a lot of partners in the room that I also would like to recognize as well, World Bank and others in supporting our work. In terms of feasibility, I think that the answers are quite clear and very well established worldwide, not just in Lebanon. The problem we face in Lebanon is beyond technical feasibility. But since you asked about it, maybe I'll share a couple of examples of what we've done related to the war that we just had or are having. We had a couple of projects I would like to highlight. One is a project led really by friends, colleagues in MSFEA, Mr. Hilmi Al-Khatib, who's sitting there, Dr. Munir Mabsout, Riyad Lasad, a contractor, private entity who's curious and passionate about the topic, and myself. And what was done is collecting rubble from 5 points in the country, in southern suburbs and in the south, and looking at the basic performance of this material before recycling it. So we did what the team did in the lab is a basic mechanical properties testing of those materials. Are they good enough for reuse? So we looked at things like specific gravity, particle size distribution, and things like that, and the results were very promising. So that was well established that this material, this feedstock material, is good enough for recycling. On the other end, with a group of students over the past year, we have a capstone project, final year project. I had 4 passionate students who worked the entire year on demonstrating one idea, which is recycling the rubble into concrete blocks. So what we use as partitions in buildings, if you go around, these are blocks. And I have a mini version of a block of what they did. Basically, they collected material from one site or a couple of sites actually in the suburbs in Dahi, near the house of one of the students, Ahmed Mahdi. So Ahmed and his friends, Jad, Kinda, and Luay, collected the materials, washed them in the labs with the support of Hilmi and the team, and then went to a private entity and did masonry blocks, CMUs with recycled material. Of course, they did the real size, but I didn't want to carry a big one with me this morning. So I'm carrying a small one that they gave me as a souvenir. And the results were very promising. So I'm happy to talk about that maybe at a later stage, but the results were very promising in terms of the feasibility. It's really to them.
You mentioned that, yeah, on a technical level, it is promising. And my follow-up question would be, what is missing in the Lebanese landscape, especially talking about not only academic, but policy development and industry implementation towards basically going to a circular model?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Ralph. So yeah, from a technical lens, it's very feasible. One, first of all, we don't use these for structural performance, but even if you do, the compressive strength of the rubble, the rubble CMU or the masonry blocks using recycled materials was better than virgin material. So that's good. And the other properties were also good in terms of porosity and so on and so forth. So technically it's fine. What is missing? What is missing, I think, is a lot of what was mentioned in the earlier sessions, which is around the policy, the incentives, and the umbrellas that will allow for recycling. Also, what is missing is more collaboration across the different partners. I think we're already making a better effort than probably was what was done in 2006 in terms of looking at the problem. But as academicians, we always strive for excellence. And I think more collaboration needs to be done. More information should be shared. We as academicians rely a lot on data from the field. The more data we have from the field and access to materials and information, the more our methodologies are refined, the more our findings are solid, and the easier it'll be to set the standards for implementation in the field later on.
That helps me wonder, talking about the collaboration first, sharing data, you meant that, and going to you, Ms. Grace, on the collaboration. But before that, I would love to know more about Holcim. Today, which types of CD materials you are currently capable and interested in recycling in the context of Lebanon? And if not, because as mentioned, there are many limitations here and there. Can you walk us through Holcim's perspective on that?
Sure. Thank you, NCC, for inviting us and for considering Holcim to share our insights and our, let's say, modest expertise in Lebanon when it comes to CDM. I like to talk about CDM instead of CDW, so construction and demolition material. It's important to say at first that Holcim has been engaged and committed in recovering and recycling construction and demolition material all over the world. Of course, in European countries and in the US, it's much more advanced than our region, Middle East and Africa. Mainly, again, because of legislations and availability of a good supply chain. In Lebanon, what we can do or what we are capable of doing in terms of recycling and reusing material, we are capable of using any type of construction and demolition material. However, it's not about what we can do. It's about the percentage of material that we are able to integrate in our process of manufacturing cement. So in our case, based on the local context and what the norms allow, with the very limited norms, we are able to replace between 10 and 20% of the raw materials in to produce cement. So we can do this by using alternative raw material. So the limitations first is about the norms. So we are not allowed, based on the Lebanese norms, to go beyond this percentage or to use mineral components from recycled material. So the Lebanese norms, they do not specify in the, let's say, in the production phase. There are different phases in our business when it comes to cement production. In the first phase, we are allowed to use a certain percentage of recycled material. However, when it comes to adding mineral components at the cement phase, this is not allowed according to the norms. So the mineral components do not include recycled aggregates, plus recycled materials. And there are no norms at the moment for concrete as well. So this provides, or it's considered one of the limitations in our business.
I would love to really, because I'm changing a bit of the questions because the answer gave me another insight. Talking about the market and positioning in the market, today, the obstacle is not the economics behind it. It's basically the norms, or it's both?
It's not just the norms. There are many obstacles. Norms is one of them. Having let's say, a sustainable supply of materials that can be used is another obstacle. So at the moment, there's no sustainable supply of recycled material.
So talking about logistics.
Logistics, supply chain, quality of the material. When the material is too heterogeneous, we cannot use it. It has to be sorted, impurities removed, contaminants, and so on. So there are limitations at different levels. It's not just about the cost.
So kind of a missing stakeholder between the waste to make it as a material.
Definitely.
Sir, can you help us with this? How do transportation and logistics challenges, especially the cost and availability of trucking, impact the feasibility of CDM recycling at the scale in Lebanon? We have a gap, as Ms. Grace mentioned.
Yes, thank you, Ralph, and thank you for having me here. I would like to first of all to stress on what you're saying, not calling it waste. For the manufacturing sector, waste is a cost. And while the CDMs should be viewed as a resource, not as a cost. So if we look at this CDM, okay, let's take that. The CDM as a production input or as an industrial resource, then we can be a lot more positive in our industrial outlook towards it. It's little things. It's very telling that, for example, in the glass industry, the waste of glass that they use in the production is not called glass waste, it's called cullet. And the reason why they call it cullet is because it's psychologically more acceptable than waste glass. So I think when we take away this psychological barrier, then we become very good as industrialists, as transforming this resource into a usable, billable output. And sure, there is a huge logistical challenge in this, and but if we look at it as a resource, it becomes simply another issue of supply chain or distribution channels. If we look at the waste as a supply and the recycling plant or the crushing of the waste, this as a production site, and then the market becomes Holcim, it becomes the steel trader. Then in this way, we start using it as a regular industrial supply. Now, the challenge, the present challenge in Lebanon is that it's very difficult to increase the supply chain or the distribution channel threefold overnight. And this is basically what we will have to do today. And basically, it's because of the post-conflict rubble that we have on site. If you take, I just give you a few figures to have a better scale. If you take only the south of Lebanon, southern Lebanon, and if you install 4 crushers or 4 sorting plants, we need 150 trucks to work for 150 weeks to transport these from the sites where they are to the production site, what we call production site, which is a crusher or whatever. And then we need another 100 trucks for another 150 weeks to take them from the production to the market, which is Holcim or the backfills, etc. So this is a total of 250 trucks. And if you want to have an idea, today's fleet of tippers in Lebanon, functional fleet, is 350 trucks. So and these are, some of them are working. Almost half of them are not working now. But this is only for South Lebanon. Then if we look at the Bekaa, it's another 100 trucks, and the Dahia is another 150 trucks working for 150 weeks, so it's 3 years. So this is really a huge challenge in terms of logistics. And this is something we will have to address at some point, because we're talking about what do we do with it, and how do we use it, and what percentage. But at some point we have to move it. And this is one of the big challenges.
Move it so we can create the market
Right.
for it. And talking about that, I would love to focus. What would be an incentive to push for it? Is it a financing model? Is it a public and private partnership? What could encourage Lebanese industries to invest in recycling infrastructure? Because it is a gap. We're talking 3 years from now, so we can have the total of the South really recovered. Not to mention the other part of the country, not to mention the 1 million tons per year having CDM from as per year we have it as on average in Lebanon.
Right. Incentivizing should be at most to the extent of the additional cost which is incurred by the industries. And this is really, if you look at it, it's not that big. It's a slight cost premium. However, the state cannot offer any subsidies in Lebanon. The best they can do is propose some tax incentives, as we talked, as the speakers before me talked. And then, you know, you can only look at maybe no VAT on the purchase of CDMs. Only this will make a change. It's a make 10% change or 11% change. But the most powerful incentive that we can get is to create access to finance for people who are using recycled materials. The biggest challenge today for industries and businesses as usual, in general, at large, is to access finances without banks being available to procure loans. We have to have some, let's call them CDM loans, that at least this will incentivize very powerfully the industrialists, and it will not cost. It will be only a cash flow issue. As for marketing, today there is no real marketing advantage in using recycled materials because the public is not properly educated to privilege products which are using recycled materials. You know, I suspect that maybe if you give them this, they will say, "La, hada jay min zbala, we want new ones." So they need to be properly educated about it.
Talking about educating, Dr. Sroor, what testing methods and performance benchmarks are most relevant when assessing recycled aggregates? For structural or non-structural in use of Lebanon?
So I think I mentioned a little bit about this in the previous question. I'll build a little bit more on it. So I think there's testing that is at the level of the resulting materials, that is going from this journey from CDW to CDM. Let's call it a journey. So the resulting material that is coming from the waste, there's a lot of testing, kind of like what I talked about, the work done in the labs with Mr. Khatib and Dr. Mabsout and Dima Hassaniye, testing the mechanical properties of the materials. So we're talking about simple tests to look into the density, into the porosity, into specific gravity and things like that, particle distribution, how good are this material for recycling. And then you have the products that you make. And the products that you make, it could range from building products, materials, or it could be in infrastructure and roadway applications. A lot of this work is really well established worldwide, to be honest. But we can validate it in the context of Lebanon with the materials that we have here. And just to give you an idea, in roadway application now worldwide, especially in Western Europe and North America, especially in Western Europe and Northern Europe, they allow for what we call 100% replacement of RCA or recycled concrete aggregates, meaning you can build a road with the various layers using 100% of recycled materials for roadway applications. And then when you move into the structures themselves, they allow if it's what we call a load-bearing structure that is carrying weight, then you can still replace with recycled, but with lower percentages. But there are all kinds of applications where you go all the way to 100%. But again, the norms in Lebanon, as Grace mentioned, do not allow for this. So we need to build confidence. We need to work on the awareness and education at the people's levels, but also at the decision makers levels as well. Well, I don't know. The end users. Special people. Yeah.
Moving a bit away from Lebanon, talking about international standards and benchmarks, Ms. Grace, can you tell us, Holcim, what they're doing in an easier context, so to say?
Let me tell you that no matter where our operations are in the world, Europe, Africa, Middle East, Asia, none of this is implemented without legislations. From the most advanced countries, Switzerland, Germany, Europe, everywhere in Europe, to less developed countries in our region, like Morocco, for example, our most recent example in one of our companies, it all started with legislations, banning dumping of waste in landfills and dump sites everywhere. So it's true that we are advanced in implementing recycling of materials, but we cannot do this without legislations, wherever we are. So based on our experience, the next step after the legislations and the policies is for the government to support this supply chain, the availability of recycling platforms, the sorting facilities. So it could be through governments, it could be through subsidies, international donors, private companies. So there are different models around the world where we operate.
Can we see it in procurement standards, for example?
In terms of procurement, one of the steps is for government buildings or for the government to mandate that public infrastructure projects, public buildings, and so on, to include a certain, let's say, percentage of their construction material to come from recycled concrete or material. So this is also one of the lessons that we have learned and we have observed in our operations. I'll give just one example. I'll give two examples, actually. Switzerland is the pioneering country in the world when it comes to reusing construction and demolition material. But it started in 1990. Now they are pioneers, but it started, it's a long journey, as you said. So in 1990, they banned landfilling of waste. 15 years later, they mandated that public buildings should include a small percentage of recycled material during their constructions. 10 years later, they updated their norms to include a higher percentage of recycled material in construction, in the construction. Now, they are the most advanced all over the world. The most recent example, as I said, is in Morocco. Our operations in Casablanca are now involved in recycling construction and demolition material only because the local municipality decided to ban dumping waste in the community, and they are supporting a supply chain whereby contractors or construction projects, they have to take their waste through the supply chain and get it to the cement manufacturer for recycling. So it's a different context, but it all started with the legislators or the government or the authorities to initiate this project.
Kind of a ripple effect, taking it from the dump site, and
exactly,
we have to come up with a solution. Sir Dan, I know you talked about it, but here, let's consider we closed our CDM are not eligible to go to dump sites. And I really want to tackle the private sector here. And from your experience in the industrial sector, are there main economic incentives or disincentives if there was a creation for the market? Now, for example, construction companies, they don't have a place to get rid of their CDM. What is the gap beyond that for the private sector to be able to be protected?
Yes, before talking about incentives because I don't consider regulations as an incentive. But I think, and I agree totally with you, it has to come at first, at least, from regulation. You know, in the US, flatbed trailers are covered, 90% of them are covered with wooden planks. There is a material called romper, which is similar to wooden planks, but made from shredded tires, old tires. It is more durable, it slips less, and it is cheaper than wood. Yet, in the US, not Lebanon, yet they haven't been using it until the government put more restrictions on dumping tires, old tires. This is when they started using it, and they gave an incentive to trailer manufacturers who use romper. So yes, it has to come from regulation. Now, there are other obstacles or how do you call it, disincentives or
to me, whenever it comes to the Lebanese context, I'm always afraid of external effects. So we don't do it on a formal way, it will end up in an informal dumping in valleys or rural areas. To be able to create a market for it, for whoever is delivering these materials, we need an infrastructure, basically a recycling infrastructure to turn it into a material. What could push this market to be really strong on the ground and not to have an external effect from that regulation?
You know, oddly enough, one of the biggest obstacles to recycling or industrial recycling is scarcity. Manufacturers are not finding enough recycled material to operate. And many of them in the paper industry or carton paper or in the plastic industry are importing waste. This sounds crazy. So maybe the first step is to prevent the export of waste. Because we are exporting waste and we are importing waste. It doesn't make any sense.
I don't.
And we are, of course, exporting a lot cheaper than we are importing because we are very good at this. Yeah. So if we put restrictions on the export of recycled materials such as plastic or paper, then this is one of the incentives. Then you have another big source of industrial or construction material. I will waste this time. It is steel and glass. Steel and glass, I don't know, I saw maybe 10% or so. I don't know if this is taken by weight or by volume, but it is significant. And the problem is that we don't have glass container factories anymore in Lebanon. We used to have 2, we have 0 now. So there's no use for it. And we need these factories. And there is no steel furnace. A steel furnace is expensive for the private sector. It's not very expensive for the public sector. So if the government were to build a steel foundry at the cost of, I think the cost is around between $15 and $20 million, they could sell and make a lot of money on recycled steel. There's, you know, some things are no-brainers and they're not even talked about.
So, Dr. Sroor, we talked a lot about the durability, the strength. I'm adding a question to the pile of it. Do you think it's a lack of awareness that we have? I believe that the private sector they do not lack of they are aware of it, but what do you think would be the motive for them to really capture this? Is it scarcity as well of recycled material or not?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ralph. Allow me to answer, but also comment on a couple of things that I heard, from our colleagues here. I do agree on the scarcity being a problem in the recycling industry, not just here, anywhere in the world, is maintaining a steady state of supply of feedstock material is a challenge. And the foundry idea is a great idea. The one thing probably that should be looked into there is the cost of energy, not just the cost of creating the foundry capital project. It's on the long run. Probably that's the hurdle. And then there was another emphasis from Grace, I think, on the legislation, and I couldn't agree more with you, but I'll add to it, there's also should be emphasis on enforcement. In Lebanon, we have a lot of regulations. Many of them are great, but the enforcement is nothing, zero. And this is a huge lost opportunity. And good segue maybe to what you asked me on what is needed. I think what is needed is a coordinated effort, an effort by the different entities, whether it's the academics, whether it's the private sector, whether it's international banks like the World Bank. And again, I thank you for having a delegation supporting our events as always. And others. And within the government, there is the parliament you saw in the morning, Dr. Najat Aoun, but also the executive body as well with the decrees. So we need really a concerted effort to set up the right legislation, to have the proper enforcement mechanism, while having conversations with people on the research side, on the practical side. I think that's what is needed, and an information-based or a data-based approach for the problem. Maybe I'll close with one little a dagger in my heart, to be honest, with the problem on rubble here, other than the human cost and all that, but the wasted opportunity. I'm not sure anyone knows how many trucks carrying rubble have moved from point A to point B in the country. We have a good idea on what happened in Dahi because that's visible, that's nearby. But in the south, go talk to anyone you want to talk to. I don't think anyone has log sheets showing number of trucks going from point A to point B with this much load. This is a gold mine for us researchers because then we know about the materials, how much material was moved, where from to. It can inform the supply chain models that we build for handling the rubble, whether from a research perspective or from an application perspective. All we have is disjointed information left and right. If this information exists somewhere, please let me know. I would like to have it. So I'll close with that on my side. Thank you.
Ms. Grace, I'm going to end the panel with you in terms of wasted opportunities. What practical steps can Lebanon take to create an environmental for large-scale for large-scale industrial recycling and circular construction?
Well, first, as we said, to localize. If we decide, let's say, to follow European norms, to localize them, to adapt them to our local context, because it's not a one-size-fits-all model, wherever we are. Second, it's, of course, to update our norms, product norms and standards, provide the market so that we as industrialists or cement maker not just produce this recycled cement or product, but so that it has a market out there. So this can be done, as I said, through public projects, infrastructure. It could start with non-structural projects, a base for roads and so on. And of course, to ensure quality of this product. So for example, a third-party certification, so that the end users, contractors, project owners, designers, they trust and they have the confidence that these products are of good quality and that they are compliant to the norms.
Thank you. Basically, those 4 points were mainly discussed. I'm glad Okay. No. The questions at the end. Not with me. All right. I would like to thank you all to have this really insightful conversation. I hope, and I learned a lot. I took a lot of notes, and the hope we will be able to develop a structured model for not only the public, but the private and the academic to find a partnership between all of them. It's clear the answer is there, and hope for the best. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this insightful discussion. Now we're off to our final panel, Building Strategic Partnerships for Sustainable Impact and a Better Policy Framework. We have with us Dr. Lamia Mansour, Senior Environmental Specialist at the World Bank. We have Ms. Iman Tabbara, Managing Partner at Tabbara Law Firm and General Secretary of the Lebanese Private Sector Network. And we have with us Dr. Carla Khatir, Director of Research at CNRS Lebanon. And we have moderating this session, Mr. Antoine Kallab, Associate Director of AUB NCC. Thank you.
Thank you, Aya, and thank you to our panelists as well as the previous panelists and the moderator. So this is a panel very much that is coming in and trying to look into everything that was discussed today and seeing, looking at the big question, which seems very simple, but in practice, unfortunately, we keep discovering that it's not as simple as one would like it to be, which is how can we work together? And I'm not saying this in a critical or with criticism, but I'm saying effectively coordination, joint planning, alignment of decisions, alignment of priorities, alignment of resources is a discipline, is an effort by itself. Especially in a country like Lebanon, where you have different governmental and non-governmental actors who are all working according to different priorities. This is the reality. It's not something bad. It's not something good. I feel this is one of the reasons why we have a strong entrepreneurial sector, for example, why we have NGOs capable of responding to disasters. However, to which degree this is sustainable, I'm not sure. Now, I'm glad to have here representatives from three main sectors in Lebanon. First, Dr. Carla Khatir, who is from the public sector. She's Director of Research at the CNRS and currently an advisor to Her Excellency Minister of the Environment, Dr. Tamara Zain. I have with us Dr. Lamia Mansour, Senior Environmental Expert at the World Bank. And I have with me Ms. Iman Tabbara from the Lebanese Private Sector Network and who is also the Managing Partner at Tabbara Law Firm. So if I may, I'm going to call you by your first name. Carla, I'm going to start with you. If you can first update us on the Minister's approach to post-conflict rubble management at the moment, any recycling plans on the long term, and maybe discuss the challenges and opportunities that are currently being faced. And then I'll ask you another question.
Thank you, Antoine. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for NCC also for the invitation. If anyone is taking videos, please don't take me because I'm moving too much because I have a sciatic. So it's not very elegant on the on a video. Thank you. Jack in the box. So thank you, Antoine. So effectively, as you just said, I'm Director of Research at CNRS. So for people coming from the research background, I'm one of you. But I'm also serving currently for the Ministry of Environment as advisor to Her Excellency. And I have been granted the responsibility to handle among the files that I'm handling the post-rubble management, the rubble management post-war. And this is not an easy task, as you can all imagine. I have listened to the previous panel, and indeed, one of the main challenges is not what to do with these rubbles once they are in their final destination, and how to treat them, recycle them, sort them, make use of them, upcycle them, valorize them. The challenge is how to remove them from the roads to the, and this challenge has been a bottleneck for the government and especially for the Ministry of Environment since the end of the crisis. If we put an end to this crisis in November until, so because the date is also very, very fluid, and one could argue that the conflicts are not, and just for the sake of the discussion, if we put an end to this in November, in February, the rebels were still in the streets and people have started removing them themselves or trying to sort them at wherever they are. So one of the key challenges were what to do with this and how to move them from where they are between the streets. And this was not the case. The problem of the Dahya was not solved, but what was handled, let me say it this way, was handled by a decision of the previous government to enlarge the Costa Brava. So they have moved the rebels to the Costa Brava to be used then, and this is the decision of our previous government, which we had to follow up with whatever consequences it had. So for the south and for the Bekaa, people.
Carla, if I may just follow up. No, it's fine. So can we confirm that the rubble from Dahya is being used to expand the Costa Brava landfill? Is
Yes.
this an ongoing
Yes.
unconfirmed
Yes.
process? Okay.
Yes.
And maybe what are very quickly some of the environmental safeguards used in this process, if available?
In the Dahya to Costa Brava, I don't know.
Okay.
So I cannot answer. But in the rest of the rubble management, there's the World Bank. My colleague Lamia can talk about this. Have put a lot of strict regulations with regards to the handling, to the transport, and then the Ministry of Environment with UNDP have issued a standard operating procedure on how to go from rubbles until the restoration in case they are used in, I don't like the term backfilling, but in the restoration of some of the quarry sites. So to be very brief, today the rubbles have been moved from wherever they have fallen to a temporary site. This site or these sites have been undergoing an initial environmental evaluation, although a regular procedure would have been a full environmental impact assessment. But to speed the process, Her Excellency has agreed to have them as IEEs. And now the discussion is how to move them from the temporary site to their final destination, which is one of the quarry sites effectively. But let me just be clear on this one. In the quarry site, they will not all be used for the restoration. They will be sorted, they will be recycled to a maximum of 70%, let me say to a minimum of 70%, and the rejects will be used on site. The dilemma we are now facing is whether this sorting and reuse can be done on site in those temporary sites and to reduce the cost, environmental cost and financial cost of transportation to the final destination. But this is now under feasibility study evaluation. And I think I can stop here because I can be endless on this topic.
I will ask you one last question. If you can give us a brief answer, is how can the ministry be empowered? Because we're seeing that seemingly the ministry has a policy of trying to recycle as much as possible and end up with a sustainable outcome, more or less, to this problem. And we have to accept, we talked about it, we have to accept a certain level of minimal environmental damage. This is not because of rubble, this is because of the conflict at the end of the day. But how can the ministry, what is the ministry looking for in terms of means to be more effective in playing its role?
I was expecting this question, and yet I don't have a very clear answer. I think that the question, very honestly, the question would be, or the answer would be, the government in general needs to be trusted. And once it's trusted, the hand that it will reach out for people will be met. But I do understand that trust is a very big yes, concern to reach and very easy to lose once you lose it. So yes, I think that partnership requires trust. I do believe that the private sector, the academia, the research are incontournable partners. But I think that in the timeline, some of the actions require action on the ground, some of the action will require research, some of the action will require industry. So my answer would be patience and trust. I don't know if I can be clearer than this.
Thank you, Carla. Lamia, I'm gonna move on to you. Based on everything that Carla is explaining, and we know that the World Bank has been عم بيواكبوا or has been involved in this file back from the first meeting started in November, I remember, together. If you can explain to us how is the World Bank supporting this effort? We know there's the LEAP, but if you can, go beyond financing, what is the role of the World Bank on the day-to-day basis, on the planning, on the decision-making process, and what international practices are serving as benchmarks in this case?
So thank you for the invitation and for the previous discussions, which are very enlightening and allow us to be all on the same page of this important issue. So I want to follow up on Carla's intervention just to clarify some aspects. So from the government took the decision and provided financing to 3 entities. And this we all know, Council of South, Dahya Union, and High Relief Commission, who subcontracted contractors who took the rubble from the damaged areas to temporary sites. So World Bank did not finance any of this. There were discussions that we do retroactive financing, but this was not the case at the end. Because mainly of safeguard requirements, because we did not have the oversight of, like Aysam said, how many trucks, how was it removed, and where was it taken? And then we start looking at, are these temporary sites ownership, are they close to residential areas? So, because we asked too many questions, قلنا أحسن نظهر من القصة. However, upon the request of the Minister of Environment and many colleagues, we are looking into this now from like a rapid assessment because of the request of the ministry, which also colleagues from AUB have requested that we look into the possibility of when we start, if we want to do some treatment in these temporary sites, is this possible? So what did the World Bank do from the day one? We supported Minister of Environment and at that time Minister Yassin in issuing some guidelines which have evolved into more developed SOPs later on by the UN. We also proposed some terms of reference for a supervision consultant to supervise the removal until the temporary sites. Unfortunately, all this is happening without any supervision. This is a problematic, but this is the case. It was a gap between Prime Minister Mikati, Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, and went into cracks. And now it's too late, I suppose.
And this was at some point there was Khatib and Alami who were supposed to provide this, but the contract was never signed as far as I. Okay.
So the discussion, however, was very serious regarding rubble. And I follow up on what Deputy Najat Saliba said, what the Ministry of Environment, all the government had agreed that some of the reconstruction funding, which is very limited, 250 million is nothing compared to the needs. Still, حتى I'm surprised the government have insisted that yes, we want to allocate some funding for recycling treatment of rubble. Knowing the priorities معودين نحن آخر شيء على الليستة هي الانvironment. So we won a fight on this behalf, and that was thanks to government awareness, deputies asking for it, and of course a Minister of Environment. Whether it was Minister Yassin or Minister Al-Zain, both of them were very engaged into defending this issue. So it is now framed in the LEAP that was approved by the World Bank, that is now will be approved by the Parliament. And we have to support and to not wait until it comes and start implementation of activities together with the Ministry of Environment. And we supported Ministry of Environment to develop a master plan that is very concrete and actionable. Yani identification of quarry sites and based on extensive assessments, field visits, public and private, doing feasibility study of how many central stations do we need. Is it more cost effective to do 3 or 5 based on transportation, based on amount of rubble? All this is available. We have done presentations to partners who asked for more information, and we can come back again and make similar presentation. The master plan is not published yet, but it doesn't mean that Ministry and World Bank does not disclose the draft findings that we have at the moment. So this is where we are now. The objective, the terms of reference, actually expression, request, and I get it wrong, request for expression of interest. It's going to be launched, I think next week by CDR, to recruit a consultant who will prepare ESIAs for up to 3 quarry sites, which will and do detailed design for recycling centers on these 3 sites and rehabilitation of quarries by using the rejects that come, yani, if it is above 30, yani the 30% that remains that has not been prepared. But that does not say that this is cast in stone. Yeah. We can always do amendment, whether we need a 4th quarry station, whether we need to do some work on temporary sites or not. And a final point, because my safeguard colleagues are here, environment and social, just to say that the World Bank is very keen on is committed to environmental safeguards in line with national regulations, in line with international standards. And this allows also for a margin of participation, engagement at social level, private sector, which is very important.
Thank you, Lamia. This was very enlightening. I'm gonna go back to the follow-up questions, but first I'm gonna move to Iman. Iman, you're here with the two hats. You're here as the private sector, and you're also here as a legal expert. But let me start with the private sector perspective. What outcomes are expected from the topic of rubble management in terms of, from the private sector perspective, whether we're talking about post-conflict or long-term, and what form of engagement or role does the private see for itself in this topic?
So let me break it down first in terms of CDMs. As Grace mentioned, they are the byproduct of destruction and reconstruction. And it seems that we're constantly stuck in the cycle in Lebanon. So hence the urgency of this matter that needs to be addressed. When it comes to the private sector, we view things every time from an economics perspective. How does it affect growth of the economy? How does it impact the GDP? How can we maximize? Because unfortunately, the environment in Lebanon is considered as a luxury. So we always need to have an economic angle that computates into numbers. The way we see it in terms of reduction of cost of raw materials, reduction of transport and disposal cost, how does it affect the circular economy? How does it impact the job market? How does it help increase or develop SMEs, knowing very well that the Lebanese economy is mostly made out of SMEs. Up to 90% of our formal economy is made up of SMEs. So this is always the economic angle that we look for in terms of opportunities. And I think a lot of your previous panelists focused on the missed opportunities. And this is the sad part. In every problem, we can actually find the silver lining. Until now, we're unable to do so. So this is the private sector approach to things.
cross-sectoral. As for my legal hat, and seeing the urgency of CDMs, I think two things govern this matter. One is the solid waste management law, and the other is the private-public property law, private partnership law. Now, you have to understand that these two laws happened in the legislative awakening phase, هيدي الصحوة التشريعية تبعتنا, when Sadr happened, because we were hurrying up to get money, not because we actually wanted any actual reformist laws. So we have to يعني, put it within that frame. Now, to me, when it comes to solid waste management, and I am no expert on that matter, يعني, in this room specifically, but it's very important. I think CDW has its own nature and its own challenges. Hence, it needs to stand alone in a completely different legal framework. There are many challenges in the CDW, but for me, when it comes to these matters, it's important to highlight a full supply chain, a chain of value chain. We're starting from the regulation, the strategic planning, the regulation, the oversight, the support, the transparency, and the accountability, the responsibility. Who are these actors? So all of these matters need to be clearly identified. From my perspective, let me know when I stop and when I can يعني فيني اسحب, عرفت كيف؟ So again, CDM requires, first of all, a clear definition. It requires a clear mechanism for sorting and recycling. How do we go about the licensing system? How do we go about the monitoring? And more importantly, how do we enforce? Because now we have a lot of laws. Lebanon does not lack any laws. The problem is enforceability and holding people accountable. لأنه اليوم أي حدا ما بيطبق القانون negotiates, مش بيتحمل مسؤولية, they negotiate, and this is basically our problem.
Thank you, Iman. I actually have the same question for both Carla and then Lamia. And Carla, I'm gonna start with you. This is really based on what Lamia was saying and as well as your intervention. It is clear that with the master plan being developed for the recycling, the question of central stations, and this is a model that is more or less adopted abroad. When I'm presenting, the international benchmarking that we did, this is usually the method. Now, again, do you need 3, 4, 5? Do you do transfer stations? How many? These are they required, I suppose, a consultancy. But what kind of effort, or where are we in a discussion of, speaking of missed opportunities, where are we in a discussion that shifts us from the post-conflict and the immediate to perhaps using this opportunity to recycle these 1 million tons of CDW we have on an annual basis from the construction industry? Is there فينا نعمل يعني عصفورين بحجر واحد? Is there a way where we can use this effort not only for post-disaster but for long-term industrial development?
I'll answer part of the question, and I hope that Lamia can continue. If not, you will manage with the half question, half answer. So I'll start by answering a little bit from my own background. I'm very scared that the quarries are seen as a place where they can host garbage on the broad sense. So waste or anything. I'm very scared of this because I see quarries as being a scar, like a scar on our skin, and they should be handled or treated or approached as a scar, not as when you have your son cutting his hand, you will not go tell him, go put mud on it. You will treat it very, very, very carefully because this is a very sensitive area, in terms of habitats, in terms of ecosystems, in terms of water, underground water, surface water, in terms of continuity of the ecological corridors. So these are, unfortunately, we have inherited some kind, I'm not sure of the figure, but something between 1,500 or 1,400 quarry sites in Lebanon. most of which are abandoned. So my fear would be to see this example, which we are doing very carefully, as being, this is the solution. Whatever million you have, you go and dump them in the quarries. So I should put a lot of wraps, red, handle with care. So if ever this recycling value chain is put in place, whatever we need to put back in the quarry is not the rejects, it's what the quarry can afford, can host, in view of its own rehabilitation plan, is in view of its own ability to host. So if it has to, if the quarry wants to host, once I'm quoting the human part of it. So if we, when analyzing the quarry, understand that it needs to be stabilized in terms of remblai of embankments, we will use whatever is here for the reuse. So this was my very broad answer. Here is also an opportunity to see that we have handled, or we will be able one day to say we have handled a crisis involving rubbles, and we have used it as an example. So it's an opportunity for us, for all of us, not just for the government. It's an opportunity to do well, to minimize mistake, because we will do mistakes anyway, but to minimize mistakes and use this as an example and learn from it. So in case we can manage to do 1, 2, 3 sites, like Lamia have said now, using the money of LEAP or another funding, and we do it correctly, maybe this can guide future, but still with a lot of handle with care. It should not become, it's great, we have 1,400 sites, let's go and dump so this is part of the answer.
Thank you, Carla. Lamia, please.
I don't want to reinvent the wheel, because a lot of the ideas have already been raised during the discussion. Standards for recyclable material, public procurement incentives, fiscal instruments. It would be good to shed light in the strategy that you are developing on some priority aspects that can be uptaken in ongoing projects, so that we can pave the way or start preparing to do implementation, and in the same time prepare the ground for policies, standards, all this reform aspect that all the donors is like music to their ears. We are doing similar activities, like in one of our projects with the Ministry of Environment, we are looking at waste management, but we are also doing standards for some recyclable materials, plastic, paper, batteries. So this is the way we can integrate reforms within ongoing operation, and we are happy to accommodate. So I think it would be great to capture the discussion that came, which was very rich, and set some priorities. Let's stay exactly.
I completely agree with you, Lamia. Thank you. And you also answered the question that I was going to ask you about, how can we link these efforts into the wider reform agenda in Lebanon? And Iman, I'm going to close. Actually, I'm going to ask you one question is, so when it comes to that long-term industry, is the private sector ready for it? Is it, do they see themselves as contractors or investors, or, if you can talk a bit about the long run?
So basically, the private sector is definitely a stakeholder in this matter. It is a funder, it is an implementer, can be an accelerator, but I think, like Danny and Grace said, they can be co-designers of policies, which is something very important. And I think what we're missing now in Lebanon is that we are operating in silos. And this is, I think, our main problem. There are a lot of good initiatives. Again, these are single initiatives. We need to have them all under one umbrella. And I think this is partly the government's responsibility. In fact, when it comes to PPPs, although there are several actors willing to lend their hand in, at some point, it's the government that has to set the strategy or the specific ministry. So once this ministry actually does move forward, I assure you, there will be a lot of positive feedback from that. So because in terms of having an effective way of implementing PPPs, we need the strategic planning, we need the regulations, we need the oversight, we need the risk sharing, and we need the financial support, whether directly or through the donor community. But sometimes, because of this individual entrepreneurial spirit, we tend to sidetrack the government, and we tend to not ask it to do what is basically in its core responsibility, reach out to the private sector, to not all private sector, لأنه في عنا الكروني economy والPEPs and all of that, but this is not something I'm going to go into. But we have to meet halfway through, and we need to be able to connect the dots through academia, because it has to be data-driven as well. There's a lot of work that needs to happen, but I'm happy to be part of this conversation, because we are moving, even in incremental gains, we are moving forward. And to me, this is the best scenario possible.
Thank you, Iman. For my last question, I will ask you to answer it in 2 words only. No, Abadan, just to close. But in 2 words only, each of us on this table represents a different sector. In 2 words, what 2 words would you use to improve the working relationship amongst us? This is the question I think that no one likes to ask publicly, but I'm putting it out there.
ليش أنا عم بلش؟ Tolerance and communication. Tolerance and communication from both sides. We need funding for يعني the cost effectiveness of what we need to do needs to make sense. We are in a collapsed economy. And I will come back to you about these cement blocks. How expensive are they compared to the market price? عارف يعني we need to keep track of the reality. We are not Switzerland. We are not developing countries. We can hardly, sorry, فتحت حديث, بس we can hardly afford proper collection and disposal. We don't even afford proper collection of municipal solid waste, not to mention a luxury like this. So, okay, let's discuss economies.
بس sorry أنا هون this is something I think لميا touched base on something very important يلي نحن معودين short term matters. هيدي هي مشكلتنا. We're always rescuing something and not being able to sustain strategically. هيدي ابدا urgence بتفوتي يعني فيكم يوم اجرك يوم رقبتك يوم. هيدي مشكلتنا. So again, unfortunately, this government, also a highly competent government, is here for a short-lived term يعني, and I do hope that we can maximize the impact خلال هيدي الفترة قبل, لأنه ما بنعرف لقدام شو ممكن يصير.
Thank you. Thank you all. I think this was a great conversation. We're running late, so I will invite you to continue the conversation with our panelists around coffee if you have any questions. Thank you very much for sticking with us, and we hope this was useful. We will definitely stay in touch, and we'll invite all those who are interested to the different policy dialogues we'll be organizing in the coming weeks. Have a lovely day, and thanks again.